Reggie has a perspective on the church and where we're going. I think you will find not only entertaining to hear, but provocative and thought-provoking as we continue as a community to wonder what God is calling us to do in God's mission in the world. So Reggie, thanks.
Thank you, Bishop. I am curious how many of you were there last night. Oh my gosh, I'm shocked that you came back. I thought I made that pretty plain. And you weren't there last night, were you? Okay, well I would, all right, that's, well I'm just going to go ahead and repeat everything I said last night so that you'll be caught up. And would y'all take a seat here? I'm trying to have a presentation. There's just people wandering around. What is this all about? For crying out loud. What I mean is I'm glad you're here, is what I'm trying to say. Yes, right. It's just in a weird way. Just throw yourself down. All right, now, are there any other questions before we take a break? I just kind of live from break to break, and I think someone's trying to find the microphone to juice it up a little bit. I don't know, but that's my fond hope. Let me just dive right in because I don't have very long. And for that, you can be thankful. And by the way, these are nice digs here. I can't, this is just gorgeous, and what a gorgeous day, and it's great to be with you, stuff like that. All right, now, a lot of times when I do coaching or consulting with congregations or whatever, particularly, I had a young man come see me a couple weeks ago. One of the pre-session questions that I asked him was, what movie or what book or what Broadway play, what television show, a kind of something in that genre, what would best describe your life? And I will tell you, it's always, as a coach, I learn a lot from people just by their telling me what that internal narrative is in their head that's governing so much of their action. For instance, I asked a group one time, just as an example, a big old honking Six Flags Over Jesus church out here in the West, and I was doing a consult for them, and they were stuck. And so I asked the 7, executive pastors or whatever, I said, what movie, that question, what movie, and 6 out of 7 said Titanic. And so, you don't have to be particularly prescient, I didn't have to cut open the chickens to augur what the particular impact of that internal narrative was for these folks that I was dealing with. I mean, we see the power of the internal narrative at work in the Bible in terms of leadership and what you see, because I contend that Saul, the first king of Israel, never saw himself as king. And he lived into that narrative. I mean, when Gandalf comes to announce to him that God has taken Samuel, excuse me, but it's not a great image for Samuel. I mean, all Samuel had to do was just show up. People, just, it's Fred, he did it, and so Samuel comes to David and he makes the announcement that the kingdom is being taken from him and handed to another. His very first words in that announcement are very telling, because it says, Saul, although you were small in your own eyes. And then he goes on. But that phrase actually reveals, and you think back over Saul's life, remember how they had to draft him into being king? He was hiding out the baggage, whatever that means. And then he was tall, he had charisma, he came from a great family, but he never saw himself in the role. Now David, on the other hand, even though no one saw him in the role, I mean, how would you like to grow up with the knowledge that your family of origin, your own dad couldn't even come up with your name, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, when Samuel keeps prodding, Jesse said, these are all your sons? I mean, I'm here to anoint a king. I'm just not getting the email. And Jesse, I don't know, I mean, he grows up with, but it didn't faze David, because his internal narrative, his favorite phrase for himself in the Psalms is the Lord's anointed. And when he saw himself that way, that's why every time David fell down, he would fall up. Because he was the Lord's anointed. That's the power of the internal narrative that we are all carrying around in our heads. And increasingly, as I say, when I do coaching or consulting, I want to know what that narrative is. Well, I can tell you that the North American church has a narrative too. It's playing out in the inside of our heads, and we are living into it. And I'm suggesting that it is a narrative that is no longer compelling to our culture. In fact, it's not even compelling to many of us. And in fact, I think that God is messing with this narrative to call us forward into a much more epic adventure than the kind of stuff that we have been living out. Sometimes when I do those consultings for congregations, I'm thinking of one just about a year ago. About a third of the crowd gave me the epic answer, like, Lord of the Rings or something like that. And then about a third of the responses were stuff like, well, he's just not that into you. And that tells me that folks are caught up with small little agendas that just don't move us forward. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you a hint at what I think this emerging narrative is, and then I want to talk about how we shift a culture to move toward it. Now, by the way, you don't have to agree with the narrative I'm going to tell you or suggest to you for you to get the understanding of how you change a culture. Because that stays the same no matter what narrative you're trying to move toward. So I'm hoping that you have some takeaway value, even if you don't get the kind of what, because here's what I really think is going on, is we are moving from a church-centric narrative to a kingdom-focused narrative. See, for Christendom, for the last 1,700 years, we have been very consumed with building the church, running the church, operating the church, inviting people to church. It's been a very church-centric world. But this kingdom-focused world is like the shift from a Ptolemaic universe to a Copernican universe. All the gravity shifts, all of the references shift, and I can tell you, I think it is a much more compelling narrative, because in the kingdom narrative, we have this storyline of from, through, and to. If you can just hang on to those, I think you'll get the whole story. From, through, and to. But the world I grew up in, the church-centric world, just had the from and the through. It stopped there. It truncated the rest of the story. And I think that's why it's not compelling. If you want to see this in Ephesians 2, 8, 9, 10, give you the whole suite. Which is, we have been saved from something. We've been rescued from a life that had no option in terms of its trajectory and its narrative. Because through the cross, Jesus has pulled off, and that's the through part. Through the cross, Jesus has saved us. And so we have the Old Testament, the great story of the Exodus, and all of that. But we've not focused, I don't think, enough on delivering people to the to part. There's a reason, for instance, Ephesians 2, 8, 9, 10 gives us that we are saved by grace and in faith, not of ourselves, but we are saved to good works. There's a reason for all of that, and it's because we're supposed to make a difference in the world beyond us. Now again, if I can give you the analogy of this, to go home tomorrow, I have a marvelous privilege of flying through Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson International Airport. Now, it's the world's busiest airport, about 260,000 people a day. And I have met most of them in some line somewhere, in my way, and I'm not very Christian, because I consider time on Delta and traveling to be time off. So I'm just in there like every other pagan, struggling for position. Now, about once a week, and it actually happened on my trip on the way out here, at least once a week, Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport apparently gets the scorecard confused. They think that they're winning when all the planes are on the ground close to the hub and the concourse is full of people. Now, you know what's going on when that's the case. You got a bunch of people whose lives are being screwed up. In fact, you got a bunch of mad people. I contend that Al-Qaeda is recruiting on Concourse C down past the back gate 25. They don't know where the planes are. They've got, it's one of those Delta carriers, and their corporate motto is "We fly planes, not people," and something like that. But if we can find it, I think is the subtext of it. So, but my point is, when Atlanta Airport or any airport gets the scorecard confused, and it's all about airport-centric metrics, well, that's just, where I'm headed with this. Because airports were never designed to be destinations. If you get trapped in an airport, like fly on flypaper, all you want to do is get off, get out, get through. Because I don't wake up ever thinking, hot dog, today I get to go to Atlanta Airport. But I do wake up saying, hot dog, today I get to go persecute some Episcopalians in Southern California. Now, what I'm saying is the airport is a very vital part of my life. I can't do my life mission without it. But it has to assume its proper role or things get messed up. You know exactly what I'm saying. Making the church the destination has shrink-wrapped the storyline. And we've got a very vital role to play, but it's not to get people here and get them stuck on flypaper. But when all of our metrics are about how many we have, how many members, how much money did they bring, what are our program metrics and how busy people are around the hub, how full is the hub, are you kidding? We can do a better job than this. And the narrative demands, the need to reflect the biblical narrative actually compels us beyond this. Your liturgy has this, of course. It's just we've got to read the thing and believe it and live it. And so how do we shift then the culture where we are actually released? I'll give you one more analogy and then I'll tell you something. And the good news is at noon, I have to quit. It doesn't matter what I've said up till then. I insist at noon you all stand up and march out of here in search of lunch or something. And again, where I live, it's been lunch for several hours. So I woke up thinking about lunch actually. So I'm pretty jazzed about getting there. But I've got to get through this, and y'all have to listen really quick. So far, this is all introduction. And don't worry, there's no point to follow. So if you're struggling to make one, it doesn't work. Stream of consciousness. What was I talking about? Actually, I don't know either. So I'll give you one more analogy is what I said, but now I can't remember what it is. So here's the point of 3. To shift culture, you've got to do 3 things. Just in case you want to go with this narrative. That actually says that our job is to bless the world, and so we ought to be taking our pointers and figuring out ways of figuring out what that impact is beyond us. The first thing you have to do is you have to change language. You have to shift the language. Now, language creates culture, but it also reflects culture. And what I'm suggesting there is not just, I'm thinking about the way we talk about ourselves. If we're going to shift the narrative, we've got to begin to talk about ourselves as people of blessing, for instance. We have to talk about our congregations, not our church, because we don't have a church and they have another church down the hill and they've got another church over there. There is the church. There is no such thing as a church. See, that language betrays a storyline that's not grounded in a kingdom focus. It's only a church-focused world narrative that would give us our church, your church, their church. There's one church. That's pretty biblical. But it's going to require that we begin to change how we talk about ourselves. It also, or for instance, I work with clients all the time, and we think through just simply the way we talk about church, moving it to more of a verb, as I talked about last night. So we ask people how their churching is going in the world. And when we don't say, welcome to church today, because you're the church. You see, all that has to somehow be carefully worked through if we're going to change the storyline, because as long as we keep talking about this as the church, then we're going to have a less than epic kind of adventure that we're calling people to. In fact, if I were to be at your place tomorrow and ask, or is this Saturday? Yes, tomorrow, and ask, how many of you want to change the world? Most everybody's hand goes up. But if I ask the follow-up question, so how many of you are doing it? People just kind of meekly put their hand. I'm thinking, what's wrong with this picture? Of all people on the planet, we ought to be the incubator of people who have an idea that they want to make a difference in the world and help them figure out how to do it and release them to do it and celebrate their successes, that the world indeed is better because we have churched our way effectively. We have been salt. We have been light. We are making a difference. And so shifting language is important. The storyline you tell, what you talk about. But I don't want to talk about that much more because you'll be much better at it as wordsmiths and stuff. But all I'm saying is just think about what you talk about when you come together. If everything's about what's happening inside the church instead of what's going on out there, your illustrations, for those of you who teach and preach, if all the illustrations are church-centric, then what we're like a couple came to see me this week, or what? Are you kidding? No, your story, your illustrations shift to stuff like, as you know, I read down here at Fowler Elementary every Tuesday afternoon. And while I was there the other day, I had a conversation with the building superintendent. Your story has to change so that people get that what's going on out there, away from here. This is a gathering for a point, but the gathering is not the point. Second thing I would suggest I want to spend a little more time on than the first one is we have to change the scorecard. You've heard this implied, but let's just call it out. If you don't change, now there are people that I talk to in my consulting and in settings like this that don't like the word scorecard. Well, fine, don't use it. I'm not hung up over the word, but I am completely convinced that, you just pick another word, what we celebrate is what gets done. What we celebrate when we're together is what people think is really important. And so when we come together, if we only celebrate the gifts that are required to pull off a church service, then people will think, oh, that's what really matters in the kingdom. But if we're here and we celebrate people's contribution in their public school role and in their attorney's office and in their soccer club and in their neighborhood and all that kind of stuff, then people get a different notion. And so I want to give you some ideas about shifting the scorecard. And the bishop and I were talking about this last night. This is a very challenging notion, by the way, to people. In fact, just last week I was with another crowd, and in a much more intimate setting, so I had about 40 pastors for 2 days, and we kept going around and around about this thing, because you can't measure ministry, you can't, I don't even want to, look, figure out the impact you want to make in your community, and figure out if it's happening. How about we just say it that way? I'll give you an example. A year ago, a group came into one of my Missional Renaissance leadership groups called TarrantNet. Tarrant County is Fort Worth, Texas. And there are 175 congregations as a part of TarrantNet. And so as I met with their leaders, I discovered that their major focus was to have monthly prayer meetings of the pastor. Now, my response to that is, y'all can pray on your own time, for crying out loud. Let's do something here that matters in the kingdom and in the community. Now, you just have to know me. I'm not against prayer. I've done it. But I will tell you that that oftentimes, it takes, we got to be co-conspirators with God about stuff, and prayer should change us. It's not about changing God anyway. But anyway, so I messed with those folks. And so I'll just cut to it. And so fast forward a year later, the last time I saw them was the first week of December, just last year, a few months ago. And they've made remarkable progress because as a group now, they decided where they wanted to move the needle in their community in terms of helping people experience more abundant life. That's the narrative for you. How do we want to help people in our community? Let's break it down. That's what a kingdom narrative is. How do we want to help people experience a more abundant life? Just in case Jesus was serious about it. And my goodness, in church people, we have endless capacity to keep diverting the attention from the main thing. Life is the main thing. It's all about life. Even when the church guy asked Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus won't even let him stay. Inherit, that's like something you pick up at the end. And someone else has to get up. Jesus refuses to leave that idea of life as something out there in the future. He uses an example to pull it right up into the here and now. So we get that magnificent story of the Good Samaritan. The church people don't get it. They met their scorecard, by the way, in that story. But the only one in the story who met God's scorecard was the non-church person who gets off his donkey and helps somebody. And of course, since some of you know that's actually where the book title came from about get off your donkey. Because in that story, the person that needs help doesn't get it till someone takes that move. And so that's what I'm talking about with this. But so you got to change the scorecard to reflect that and to celebrate those moves when our people make it. So here's Taryn, and I told them, as part of our, in those key leverage points, what I told you last night about kids needing to read, at a fourth grade, at an end of third grade, fourth grade level, when they leave elementary school, or every life health indicator heads south. Now, there were 3 people in that group that I told that to a year ago at our first meeting, and one of those was a very successful business guy. He's very bright, strategic thinker. And he said to me, then, so why do we need to wait till third grade to intercept kids? He said, why don't we catch them earlier before the gap is too big? So I want you to know what the epic win of TarrantNet is now. And here's what they will tell you, and it changes the scorecard. Not how many prayer meetings did we have, but every child in Fort Worth Independent School District, every first grader will read at a first grade level. Now that sounds so, let me tell you, that changes everything. Now that's not the fall church program, but that's the long haul kingdom ability to bring abundant life to people. Now, you say, so how are they, so they started a program called Read to Win. And what they're asking people is that give us 1 hour a week to read to 2 kids. Because studies show, and you're in touch with this, that kids early on, it's exposure to words, just literally the number of words, that actually builds the neural pathway so that these kids' minds can grow. These kids come in and there's such a disadvantage. And this is why institutional generational poverty, if you want to break that cycle, you've got to break into that. And so, Read to Win, they hoped to launch with 250 mentors. They launched in October with 450 mentors because God's people everywhere said, we can do this. And they were trained, and as of 6 weeks in, they launched in October. By the time I was 17 out of the 61 elementary schools in the Fort Worth Independent School District, 16 of them had mentors, enough mentors to cover every at-risk kid. That was just in 4 weeks. And some of the kids in those schools had already moved off the at-risk level with just 4 weeks of reading. Now this is critical. This This is doable, this is scalable, and that's what I mean by changing the scorecard to reflect where do we want to move the needle on something that's huge in our culture. 2 weeks ago I was at Redwood City, I think I told you that, meeting with the mayor and the police chief and a couple of school district folks, city manager, those kinds of folks, and my question to them, if you want to know how to get started with this, my question to them was, what one or two issues, if addressed, would make the most difference in our city? That is a great question to convene your city leaders around. It's a great question to start your vestry meetings with. It's a great one. What would make the most difference? Then go after it. Why not? If we don't call this party, brothers and sisters, no one else can. The church is the only group that is deployed across every domain of culture. And if we want a better life in America for our kids and our grandkids, I'm not talking about American exceptionalism overseas and all that PCs, all that political. I'm talking about a quality of life right here in our own cities and communities. And it will not be delivered from Washington. It's not going to be delivered from Sacramento. You're going to. It's hand-to-hand combat, every community. And so you can make the decision to change the scorecard and go for that. Now, I have lots of, and by the way, here's the other thing I would say about it. Because a lot of times people say, we don't know how to connect with our community. For years, for centuries, we've been asking people to come to church. We don't know how to turn this around and go, to the folk, to the community. That's why every client I have is involved in the public school system. Because everything that's going on in your community is manifesting in the public schools. Every trend, every social ill, everything is showing up there. So if you want to get engaged and get outside your walls and start making a difference, one of the first places I tell you to go is to the school closest to you, Title I or whatever, and practice saying this in the mirror till you can say, how can we help? All right, once you can say, how can we help? Without, that being offensive, you're in. And people say, well, schools won't let us in. That is crock-a-doodle-doo. I'm here to tell you. What that tells me is you haven't tried hard enough, because schools are desperate for the help that you can give. I was at a Methodist church in Houston, and we had a Saturday morning session kind of like this, and it was a much smaller crew. It was just one congregation. And so, maybe 60, 70 leaders from the congregation there. And we talked all morning about stuff. Well, at noon, we brought in the school principal of the school closest to the congregation. A 30-year-old woman who was in her first assignment as an administrator, the principal of a Title I school with 800 kids, over 400 of whom did not speak English. And this is her first administration assignment. And this young woman, this profoundly precious human being, just talked a little bit about her kids, to use her phrase. This is Jim Collins' level 5 leadership oozing out of this woman. Her kids. You just should meet her. At the end of her, just a little bit, and I interviewed her about a couple of things. We had at least 6 ministries were established right then and there. We can do that. We can do that. We can help with furniture. We can re-landscape the front so that people have a better feel about this. We can make sure teachers aren't having to spend money out of their own pocket to decorate their walls. We can have the teachers once a month when they have an in-service day. We'll bring lunch over. I mean, that stuff just started popcorning all over the room. What that means is, as leaders, we just have to expose our people. Bring those school people in. Talk to them on Sunday morning in front of God and everybody. Give people a chance to know what they can do to make a difference, and trust me, they will rise to the occasion. I was in one of your congregations in Augusta, Georgia, not far from where I live. And a wonderful congregation, a small congregation, a Holy Comforter, if you want to go look it up, which initially to me sounded like some kind of a lemon. I didn't catch the biblical import of that. But so, and some of you right now could use a comforter because it's uncomfortable in that pew trying to sleep. If your neighbor starts listing, help them over. Don't just let them fall out. I mean, it's just not pretty. We don't have time to haul them out. So I was there, and we talked about this engagement, and one person got it. You see, it takes one. I mean, some of you are just dying under all of what can we do, what would it do? It takes one. So one person got it. And she started a tutoring program and invited her fellow parishioners to join her in it. Not everyone did. She told the rest of them that didn't, well, you're just going to hell. And just as a kind of a marketing and, a kind of communication encouragement. And, but a year later, I was back to that vestry, and the rector there, a wonderful woman, said, let me tell you how the school thing's going. I said, I'd love to hear about it. And she said, in fact, Charlie or Fred, I couldn't remember, said, you tell him. You tell him. He shook his head, no. Okay. Well, I'm talking about Charlie goes every Monday. He's mentoring a kid that failed 8th grade last year. Not only is he past 8th grade now, he's knocking the ball out of the park in 9th grade. Now, by this point in time, Charlie's sitting over there, big old tears are streaming down his face. And I said, Charlie, you're doing great work. And he shakes his head no again, and then he says, what that kid's doing for me is way more than I'm doing for you. Charlie, by the way, is 76 years old. He's been a faithful church member, coming and doing what they told him. Pay up and pray up and show up and all that. He's having the time of his life because he's actually can see the needle move on another person who's experiencing better life. He meets with his kid every Monday morning at 6:30. They go over the homework assignments. They make sure this kid who's fatherless, I mean, you know this whole story. Does he need a little money for a lunch or whatever? Charlie's just investing in this kid's life. He's getting a chance to be Jesus. He's getting a chance to live out his faith in very tangible ways. And he's just full. Now, by the way, you get Charlie up and you ask him that question, and you get in front of that congregation, and Charlie is, with tears in his eyes, talks about how this kid is changing his life. You think that's it? You think there are other people in that room that go, good night? If Charlie can do that, we didn't know Charlie knew how to come in out of the rain. But I can do that. It just inspires people. And you're changing the narrative. So every week, you see, what do you talk about? What do you celebrate? And how do we watch that shift the narrative? Or I can tell you, if some of you need a more spiritual example, so that it feels godly. Helping kids learn to read, I'm not sure that measures up. Because we know Jesus doesn't care much about kids. But let's just take an activity that we think we own, like prayer, and we know where that happens. That happens in here on a prescribed condition. What if we were to how do we take prayer to the streets? I'm telling you, you can figure. I told a client, for instance, one of my clients has adopted every single school teacher in their public school system and giving them a personal prayer champion. Again, you cannot be sued for offering prayer to people. And they announced that to them, dear Mr. Smith, dear Ms. Smith, what you're doing is so important, we're asking God to bless you. Unless you're Mormon or Islam, and then we're asking God to take you out. You can put that on the back of the prayer card because people rarely flip that over. And it covers you with those folks that, so you need a doctrinal equip. Anyway, because we know God only blesses people that are behaving like us. And and then they say in that, they go on to say, if you need anything, here's my phone number, here's my email. It's just a way of help, just a way. Or one congregation is tracking the number of people in their congregation who are prayer walking their neighborhoods. And you can do this. I can tell you, my wife, Kathy, she prayer walks our neighborhood. We have 2 Yorkies, so she's out there, at least twice a day. And by the way, dogs are great missionary. Everyone talks to people with dogs, but pick up after your dog if you want to use this in a positive way. And I know you guys in here, it's organic. But all I'm saying, so Kathy prayed, and what we're seeing after 2.5 years of living in our neighborhood is that people, because God is God, and He works like this. Is the number of people down that are beginning to open up their lives to Kathy and talk to them and ask her for prayer, because they're aware of this. Now, we don't bullhorn people when she goes by the house, I'm praying, I bless you. You can be weird and get this done. But what Kathy did is she started a book club. And our neighborhood didn't have one. It's called Reading Between the Lines. And it's been a big hit with the women there. And there's very little reading going on, but they got part of that. And so, and she just asked, all right. Or I told one of my clients, you've got the county fair that comes to you. And we all have these little festivals, watermelon, something that happens, okra, garlic, something. And so I said, you've got that, why don't you put up a prayer booth? Now, they heard the word booth. I was thinking booth like YWAM, be a presence, just go out and then, mix in with people, ask about it. No, they thought booth. They heard me say booth, so they built a booth. They sent me a picture of it. Well, we go hogging with neon signs flashing free prayer. It was the cheesiest thing you've ever seen. I looked at that and I said, oh dear God, why did you just kill me before you let me say this to these people? I can't believe it. Well, what do I know? Because then they sent me pictures of people standing in line for prayer. I don't ever wake up a day in my life wondering if God has my back, wondering if God is in touch with me. Imagine waking up this morning not knowing that. With all the uncertainty and anxiety and stuff of our culture, and then someone comes along and offers you a way of being, it's amazing. Just amazing. All right, so you can think of ways to move that, just all the resources of prayer and money and time and people. You can begin to celebrate the number of community service hours your folks do. Let them report that. Make a big deal out of it. Why not? You see, because what you celebrate, what you ask by way of information, is telling people we think this is a normative part of the Christian experience. Just like we think it's normal for you to seek out other believers to worship with, we also think it's normal for you to love your neighbor as yourself. But if we don't celebrate that, how do they know? I will tell you, too, a much more difficult school, then I got to get on. Have I mentioned lunch yet? And that is that we've got to move, again, another thing that we've been so good at evaluating is the participation in our programs. And I'm encouraging all of the folks I work with to begin to celebrate the development of people, not just the participation in our programs. You see, people need to be better. People are forever. Programs are not. People are built to last. So if you're not tracking with the number of better marriages you have in your congregation, or the number of folks have a better relationship with their kids, or the number of people who have a better outlook on life. This stuff that matters to people, why aren't we celebrating that? Why aren't we asking questions along those lines? Instead of, well, we just trust if you'll show up here often enough, your life will be better. We don't have evidence to support that. What we do have evidence is that people are tired of programs. They're tired of feel like being used to make the church better. They are the church, so let's start celebrating them. Or anytime our folks actually begin to act like missionaries, we've got to make heroes. I'm thinking of a guy in one part of our country, and he has at his home every Friday night, he and his wife host a wine study and Bible tasting. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I would join that church, as a recovering whatever. So, but here's what they invite their neighbors, and they come, and it's a big wine growing area. More and more of our country is being farmed that way, and so they'll invite growers in. The wheat may be Malbecs or whites or whatever, and so they have that discussion and they have a taste and all that. The neighbors, but then this guy at the end of the night reads Scripture. He just gets up and he reads the Bible. I mean, just without any commentary, without any authorization to this public reading of Scripture. And he reads a psalm, he reads a proverb, he reads from the red letters, and then he says, Susan and I will pray with you. Some of you got stuff going on. Okay, great to see y'all. And next week we'll be we'll be on the Chardonnays. I mean, and the thing is, he always has 2 or 3 couples that hang behind and talk. And I said, how did you get this idea? He says, well, we just noticed that we were the only people leaving our neighborhood on Sunday to go to church. We just thought we needed to bring the church to the neighborhood. That's it. Where people already are. The church needs to be there, and that's you. Now, when you let that guy tell his story in front of God and everyone on your Sunday morning gathering, it sparks imagination by other people on how they can do it. So that's what I'm saying about celebrating people developing at every place. All right, that's 10 minutes. Holy cow. All right, now, if y'all quit interrupting, we can get through this. The third thing you have to do to shift a culture is not just, shift your language and pay attention to what you're talking about and how you're talking about it, and not just your scorecard, but you have to change your leadership, your sense of leadership responsibility. Let me just be real plain about it. The old narrative, leaders in church manage the religious institution. The new narrative calls for you to see yourself in an entirely different light. You're the leader of a movement. And it's a street movement. It's not a church movement. It's a street level kind of party. And if you want to lead that, then there's some things you're going to have to do. By the way, you weren't trained for this. And maybe you didn't even sign up for this. Now, if that's the case and you don't want to lead a movement, then, go on about what you're doing and don't let anything I'm saying bother you. But a lot of you said yes to your call to participate with God and be a co-conspirator as a viral agent in bringing about a better way of life for people. That requires leadership of the movement. So here are a few things I want to say about it. First thing is go first. If you want to lead a movement, go first. I don't care what your role is, clergy, lay, whatever, go first. Quit sitting around waiting on other people to do it. Go first. I was talking to an Episcopal priest in Dallas, Texas, at the diocese there, and he told a story about going to the local school because he had just come there in his new appointment, and so he went to the closest school. It's his practice, and he went in to see the principal, and he said, "I want to know how I can help. I'm the rector up the street here, but I really consider this area of my parish. How can I help?" The principal said, I don't know, let me get back to you. He goes back to his desk, writes her an email, "Thank you for taking time to see me today. I look forward to continued conversation on how I can help." She picks up the email, doesn't take him off the addressing line, keeps him in it, sends it to a colleague of hers, and here's what her email said, which the rector read: "I just was visited by a religious nut. I don't know what to do with him. You have any suggestions?" The reply was, "Give him a menial job. It'll scare him off." Now, this Episcopal priest would have done this anyway, but now with that further tip, he goes back and she says, "I need a school crossing guard. Would you do that?" Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been a school crossing guard, but you got to get up before God, You got to get in there and you're dodging people that are putting makeup on, drinking coffee, making forget whether the kids are out of the car or not. I mean, it's terrifying. The priest does this, but you know what? He said yes, and fast forward a year later, he's in like Flint. He's the first person that principal calls for anything that rolls up on her screen of helping a kid or a staff member who's having trouble or something else, because he was willing just to do. You go first. Whatever it is, you just do it. There was a suicide, unfortunate, those are all unfortunate, but when the school, and so now he's been able to release his whole, his whole parish with their resources and mentors and all kinds of stuff into that school. He went first. All it takes is you. But the second thing I would say is don't go by yourself. Go first, but don't go alone. Make sure that someone is being exposed to the virus. Because you see, in the old world, by the way, you know this, I'm sure. Your church is never, your congregation, see there? Your congregation is never going to vote to go mission. If you put this sucker up for a vote, they're going to vote to go back to Egypt. I promise you. Because people prefer the problems they know over the unintended problems of a new course of action. So you're not going to put this up for a vote. You've got to go to school on what it means to study epidemiology. How do you help viruses become pandemics? You've got to expose, every time you see you bring it, because viruses grow through the airways, through touch, so every venue you create for people to get exposed to the virus, someone else becomes a host. And then you tell their story and they infect other people. That's the way it works. So don't go alone. A third thing that I would say, in terms of leading a movement, is make sure that you're willing to let other people be heroes. If you have to be the star of every show, it's not going to get very far. In clergy, we've been trained to be the stars of the show. It all revolves around what we can do. What can we dispense? What can we pronounce? What can we bless? So we're the star. You've got to get beyond that. So your stories about other people. And then the final thing is face your fears. Because some of you are going, they're never going to let me do this back on fire. I know if I go to take this, hey, look. Where do you think that fear is coming from? I got an email that just blew up when I opened it. Pipe bomb email kind of thing. Dear Brother McNeal. Now, by the way, no one who knows me very well calls me Brother McNeal. So I knew this was a distant cousin, if at all in the family at all, as I continue to read this email. Dear Brother McNeal, a lot of people are upset. I was leading this futuring process for a denomination, and this guy was ticked off. Or to use King James language, he was mightily pissed. And so he was very distressed, and he let me know it. And he unloaded all barrels. And of course, this email was copied to everybody. Billy Graham, Mother Teresa was still alive. She got a copy. And you know how these folks are. A lot of people are upset. Now, by the way, I tell leaders all the time, you cannot count your critics. Because they always say there's a lot of people upset about this. You say, well, who are they? Well, now I can't tell you that. Of course, that's complicated. You don't count your critics, you weigh them. You weigh them. Now, close to where I live, there's a gnat line, they call it, in southern Georgia. I don't know if you ever lived below the gnat line. But there's gnats in the air. There's just people there, they just learn to, an alternative way with what gnats? They just learn another way of breathing and taking it. All right, now, my point is, how much does 1,000 gnats weigh? And I'm telling you, nothing. And you can wrestle a gnat if you want to, and you're going to win, but the point is, but one person may weigh it, and leaders do always got gnat stuff around, so you just got to learn how to blow that stuff off. If you want to stop and deal with every gnat, I can't help you. But occasionally, one person may weigh a ton. They may represent, a whole tribe of folks around. You got to figure out, I didn't know how to assess this So I didn't know with this weight, I didn't know how much this guy weighed yet. And I was headed out of the country for 10 days at a time where when you were gone, you were really gone. You remember those days? There was nobody expected to reach you by cell phone or email. I mean, it was marvelous. And so I had to get something back to him. So I just said, "Dear brother, so-and-so, you know, I'm leaving the country. I'll be back in 10 days. We obviously need to talk. I'll be in touch." Boom. Sent the email, left the office to go home and pick up Kathy and the girls to head on our trip. Of course, now, the email was sent, but it wasn't gone. Because where was it? Of course, right here. I composed overseas, overnight flight. I composed about 300 replies. You know, each one more rapier thrust to be bled to death before he realizes he's pricked. You know, I mean, I'm just working this guy over and over. And 3 days into the trip, I'm standing in front of the Tower of London, and I'm thinking, now this is how we used to deal. Except, of course, I would be the one on the inside because there was mention of heresy, and it's what church people do to you before they let you die. That's the scary thing, to purify your soul or whatever. So, you know, and I turned to Kathy, we're eating fish and chips and, you know, crossing it, and I said, "You know, I just can't get that email off my mind." She said, "What email?" It kind of hurt my feelings a little bit. I said, "You know, that email I told you about on the way to..." She said, "Well, what if he's right?" Which, you know, I mean, and she realized then how that came out. She said, "Reggie, what would you do anything different than you're doing now? What if there are a lot of people upset? Would you do anything different?" I said, "Well, no." She said, "Well, then what's the worst thing that can happen? You lose your job? You think God would look after us?" Now, this is so aggravating. I have spent 3 days on this. And in 3 questions, this wrong woman cut straight to the heart of it. Of course, she's going to say, "Let's get on to the beef eaters tour. You know, grow up, you know, whatever." It was kind of what, you know, I mean, the subtext of this. But what Kathy really did for me was a great gift because she helped me figure out what was going on, why I couldn't release this, why I was so fixated on this. See, she just reached inside and she just grabbed that dragon that was haunting me. She just pulled it out and threw it on the ground and said, "Look, that puppy's got no teeth. What's the worst thing that can happen?" And you know, up against the Tower of London, thinking about losing a job, it may not be so bad. In a relative sense. See, the enemy of your soul and the enemy whose kingdom you are invading loves to whisper fear all the time. And it's very non-specific usually. It can be specific, but it's usually this just background noise. This roar of they won and da da da. You almost get to it, it just slithers around the, you know, like Hogwarts. Something that you can't quite see, but it makes a lot of racket. But every now and then you just can reach inside and pull that puppy out. This is why don't be afraid. It's the most frequent command in Scripture. God knows that. So your fears do not have to be the book on you. And have people around you that can keep pulling, shining the light on that old thing that slithers around, calling it out, and you'll see what I mean. All right. When John the Baptist, that meant I'm finishing. But I've got one more story, or something I got to say. When John the Baptist was in jail on death row, he sent his disciples, remember? Sent his disciples to Jesus. John would like to know if you're the one, the matrix person. And of course, Jesus was really ticked off at this. Because he went off on a rant at that. Oh, you go tell John that to remind him that his folks got an angel too when he was expected. And you remind him that his daddy couldn't say a word till he showed up. And you remind him that he was there when Dad spoke at the baptism. I mean, these are stories those early stories, look, our family lore. This is his cousin. This is the stuff they talked about at Thanksgiving when the family was there. And to get this question, are you know, of course you know that's not what Jesus did. What did he do? He said, you go tell John what? The lame, y'all seen the movie, haven't you? The lame are walking, the blind are seeing, the leper. I used to read that and go, come on, Jesus, for crying out loud. He's on death row. Give him a straight up yes or no answer. It's just, boy, talking about slow to the party. Those are kingdom code words. Because everybody knew that when the lame would walk, the blind would see, and the lepers would, that the kingdom was busting out. So what Jesus says, you go tell John the kingdom's busting out. He'll figure it out. Because then he turned to that crowd and says, there's not been a better man born than my cousin John. What an affirmation. Some of you have some doubts. In fact, if you don't have some questions, you probably aren't paying attention. You should have some ambivalences. I don't know a lot of this stuff that I speak with such great certainty about. I'm just a seminar speaker. What do I know? But your ambivalences aren't the book on you. The book on you is a God who decided when you would show up and where on the planet, and decided to put you into this time where the decisions that you make are going to impact the whole flow of the movement from here. He could have picked another century where if you just didn't spill the juice, you just didn't mess up too bad, you're okay, you just took it, you just, no, that's not where you are. These are momentous. I want you to feel the confidence that God has in you to give you this leadership at this moment. And if you seek Him and change the narrative and get His epic in mind, then you'll hear the lame are walking, the blind are seeing, and people downstream from you will say, you know what? There's never been a better group of leaders in the Episcopal Diocese of San Diego than that group. Right. So what do you say? Amen. That's good enough.